everybody. This is Classic Amateurs. I'm here with my mate Norman out of
Hello.
Hungary at the moment. And this is
Hello.
Raz, currently spending some wonderful holidays in the south of France, not too far from Marseille in Provence. And we haven't given up. We're always eager to share our notes with regards to amazing books that we've read. And we encourage each other to read if we haven't, as well as you. And yeah, Norm, do you want to add anything?
Subscribe and like us. We are great. We want to be the best and biggest podcast in the world. Please.
That's a great sort of call to action. Yeah, so today we wanted to touch upon a different theme from the previous ones and tap into a promising comparison. We thought we select sort of two types of authors, two types of books that have strong resemblance in the area of adventure. So we landed on, I'll pronounce it in the French way because I'm in France right now, Jules Verne with Around the World in 80 Days, and Norm thought this goes very well with George Orwell and Invisible Man being kind of a case in point.
No. A.G. Wells.
Sorry, A.G. Wells.
Invisible
so
Man.
Well, I think the reason why I made that mistake is that I read them one next to each other. In my mind, I always mistook the names of the two authors. It's been more than 15 years since I've read either of these books. So it was great to spend some time this morning. I even came across sort of a library here where I actually found the copy of Around the World in 80 Days. So it was good to just peruse it a little bit to remind myself what it was like reading it.
Yeah, brilliant. So I think the two books are both great adventure stories, both written in the 1900s, if I'm correct. And they're both aged super well. Like, these are adventure stories I would recommend everyone to read, even as of today, although a lot of the technology obviously is outdated, but just reads super well and everything just so spot on and works amazing. The Invisible Man itself is, as the title suggests, about an invisible man and his adventures or misadventures, while Around the World in 80 Days is, as its title suggests, a guy going around the world in 80 days. Yeah, very straightforward. I like that. There's not much mystery behind the titles.
I think what was fascinating reading it when I was, I guess, 13 or 14. And by the way, Around the World is an amazing children's or teenager's book because it's so easy to read. It has this great realism that sort of was very fashionable at the time, but kind of stripped down a little bit, right? It's not Balzac or anything. It's a lot easier to read. I just remember, basically just reading it in one go. I think it was in a day or two, just spending the time and devouring effectively. And I'm really curious, maybe with something we can unpack together, Norm, is what makes a great adventure book irresistible.
Wow, okay. I thought about that quite
there.
a bit, and I think we'll see, because these two stories are quite different, so we'll have to really dig into what do they share really and what makes both of them really, really good. So do you want to just go through like a quick synopsis summary as to what Around the World in 80 Days is about, and I'll do the same with Invisible Man?
I'll do a very amateur version of the synopsis with Phileas Fogg being the protagonist, a wealthy Londoner placing a wage against some of his club members that he can pull this off in an acknowledgement of the power of the Industrial Revolution and what it had attained, that they were effectively, that he was capable, and I think he waged 14 pounds or something like that, that he's capable of doing the Tour du Monde, the world tour in 80 days. And I want to just linger on how he imagined him doing it. And I want to just, because it's very interesting to compare with how we see it today. And I think that's quite fascinating, right? We think of global travel as being something quite easy. I spent 28 hours from Sydney to Europe a few weeks ago. And it's fascinating to think about that from London to Suez, through railways and boats, you would spend 7 days. And then from Suez to Mumbai on a boat, you'd spend 13 days. From Bombay to Calcutta on a train, you'd spend 3 days. And from Calcutta to Hong Kong on a boat again, it'd be 13 days. And I'll just skip a little bit, but the exciting part is Yokohama to San Francisco, 22 days. And then the Atlantic between New York and London is 9 days. That's just some of the segments that he was planning on taking. Of course, the story doesn't go that way. That's the exciting part. It is all the challenges that he faces along the way, as he also depicts in a very, very colorful way all the places that he visits. So it's clearly it's almost like, a sense of the world for the very first time to the masses, what it's like to see the whole world with all its little challenges and anecdotes and specific rituals and sort of troublemakers everywhere, people that help you, people that betray you, all the while having this huge financial wager above your head.
Yeah.
I won't. Should I spoil how it ends?
I think most people already know the ending. Like, honestly, the number one thing I remember from it is the ending that actually taught, I think, generations of kids what time lag and what jet lag is, right?
That's just mind blowing,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like finding yourself that if you go around the world, you actually gain a day, and that what he thought was the 80 days had already passed, had given him one more day, and that actually allowed him to make it. It was such a mind blowing revelation. I remember. Wow,
so it's around the world in 79 days.
Technically,
plus a bit of rest.
Plus one.
Technically. And I think what I heard from the book is when it comes to the actual trip and the length of the trip, he was actually quite spot on, because quite a few people tried to do the same trip after the book came out and became a massive success. And most people did somewhere between 74 and 78 days. So it was reasonably close. He wasn't just throwing out a number. He actually came up with a pretty solid argument how long it will take to get through it.
What's not clear to me is that if anyone had already tried this before, or was it just his imagination for the first time, conjuring it all up and effectively putting it all together?
From what I understand, there were trials and tests on how it needs to be done, but a lot of it was tied to innovations. Like, I believe the Around the World in 80 Days starts off with the Indian Railroad, they talk about the Indian Railroad and how that will help you to get through the world in 80 days, right? And then one of the twists is related to that. But the point is that it's all technology, it's steam engines and whatever they use.
I think that's what's still inspiring about it, because it sets it up in the most capitalistic place in the world at the time, right? The London, which was the capital of the biggest empire in the world, British Empire, as person of wealth, and then you see capital, right? The idea, which is so kind of inspiring, is that with money, with the resources that a character has, they can afford anything in the world, and this is what's possible. And then the use of technology all of a sudden, right, allows you to be in a completely connected world where 80 days is actually not that long a time.
It is, yeah. It depends on for what, It's like, if you're waiting for a loan approval, 80 days is quite a bit. Looking for a job, it's quite a bit. So I guess one of the reasons it's obviously an adventure book is that the characters in them, in both 80 Days Around the World in 80 Days, and The Invisible Man, they have very strong convictions, and they stick to those convictions from beginning to end. So they don't really get depressed about it or change their mind,
despite
or
no matter what happens,
direction.
no matter the betrayals, no matter what money happens along the way, loss of the way.
Yeah, and I believe the main guy, Phineas, I'm not really sure how to pronounce his name. He actually bet all his money on it, right? He can just says, "Hey, fuck it, I'll do this no matter what. If I come out right with it, then I'll win, and if not, then well, I'm the first victim of extreme gambling history." Yeah, I guess you kind of see the same patterns in The Invisible Man, which is nowhere near as happy and straightforward as Around the World in 80 Days, but it still comes off with a strong premise and consistent premise. It's about a man who turns invisible, and the most of the story is around
not because he wants to, right?
To after.
Necessarily, I don't know.
No, he does.
I remember it being quite tragic.
So
I was quite moved by the intrigue of that book. It's like, this is really dark.
A little bit, yeah. So the core idea is everything that's related to the Invisible Man, for most of us, is like through movies and some of the cartoons, and where the Invisible Man is kind of like a wacky character. But the original book is not quite that. In the original book, this guy whose name is Griffin, he turns invisible. He's like a scientist and figures out how to turn invisible, but realizes very quickly that living in England invisible is not a great place to be. Firstly, you have to take all your clothes off to be invisible, and being in England, you're always cold, so it's a bit weird. So he actually wants to turn back visible very soon and works on it, but he's running out of money and he's just kind of like getting into conflicts with people. He also becomes a bit distant from humanity, so he's a little bit of a psychopath.
Really, yeah, it's
And
really a
the
story
whole
of
story is
annihilation.
really around a little bit. Yeah, it's corruption of power he gained. And initially he's kind of sees it as a curse. Later on he sees it as a blessing. But that's not really a point because it's just a fun story. The main body of the story is just him fighting with people and moving on and striving for his whatever he wants to achieve. And you see that I think that's true for both Around the World in 80 Days and The Invisible Man is that dialogues don't necessarily change much. Like dialogues are just kind of there to prepare you for the next adventure, for the next action, right?
Mm.
It's everything is action oriented. Everything is resolved via action. You have to run somewhere or you have to fight someone. You have to get in there. You have to do it. And I think what I like about Invisible Man is that while it is a very serious topic, it's actually comical. A lot of the early pages of the book is about the Invisible Man fighting with these superstitious villagers. Like they think that he's bringing in ghosts because they see like furniture flying across the air all the time, right? Because the Invisible Man carrying them, and they think that he's like a weird guy and stuff getting stolen in the village. So he's like everyone is thinking that it's him, and they are right. And then there's all sort of like chase scene, and at one point he just slaps villagers left and right, and no one knows where the slap is coming from, so they slap each other. It's kind of like fun, right? There isn't really much topic or serious, meaningful message here. It's just, hey, this guy is invisible and it makes everyone's life terrible. And then obviously it turns into a much more serious and much more dire story where the Invisible Man realizes that no one is his friend really, and he becomes murderous. And then there's this massive like shootout slash chase scene where in the end he loses essentially. And yeah, that's how the story
That's right.
ends really.
It's not a happy ending. So,
No, not for him.
yeah.
You don't really feel too sorry for him. I feel like he has it coming. In the same time, there are other characters that you kind of feel more empathetic with, although they're just kind of like side characters.
It was one of the first books where I really struggled to, really struggled to feel empathy, right, for the main character, because you do see their downfall, them being in this very, very unusual situation, and then taking advantage ultimately of the benefits of being invisible, rejoicing in that. And it's almost like a Dostoevskian plot in a way, right? Is God doesn't exist, or you're allowed to do anything, pretty much. We spoke about in the past. Here you're invisible, therefore you have no responsibility. You can do anything you want, and that's
and
I was really struggling as a young teenager. I think 13 or something. I didn't really get it, and I was reading it, and I was very diligent in finishing the book, but I really struggled to enjoy it because it was harsh in a way, right? The ending is. It was exciting, it was fun, and then it was like, wow, this is it took a twist there.
Yeah, well, he gets power days, right? He announces the terror of the Invisible Man, and he kind of just promises to hurt one of his old friends, which actually kind of reminds me of like a lot of like drunk guys talk like that. Like they just kind of like get into conflict and they exaggerate. It's like, come at me, bro. Come at me, bro. It's very much like that. It's just the Invisible Man is just this bro that's just gets a bit too crazy, and it turns bloody in the end, sure. But it's all still just kind of like entertaining because you watch them, and like the whole story is just how he's creeping through the different houses and tries to jump and run away from the authorities, and like how some bullet grazed him and he barely gets out, and everyone in the village is trying to like crawl through the floor to try to find his body. It's awesome, right? It's so much fun.
Speaking of entertainment, is you just
looking
at the table of contents for Around the World in 80 Days. And that's what's really exciting about it, is that it's so episodic in a way, right? Every scene is kind of iconic, and then even the titles of each chapter basically are like the one where they cross the Pacific Ocean. It reminds me of Friends, where every episode is like the one where Ross kisses, I don't know, whoever.
Yeah.
So I can sense that inspiration.
Sacred Connection. between the best series ever created and 80
the
Days
one
Around
where
the World.
Phileas Fogg shows to be at the to show what was expected of him, and there were always teasers, and when you read through, it's like, it's not exactly what I expected.
Nice,
but it keeps you going.
Yeah, I think another thing I've noticed with adventure books is most of the twists are not projected very well, and I think that's intentional. Like when it's an adventure story where just your main character is getting into new troubles, you don't really want people to know what's up, right? You don't want to, just want to like have that element of surprise and see how they get out of it, right? And you see that with Invisible Man as well. A lot of the new characters and new events just kind of happen, and they move forward. What I do want to ask you is what about character development? Like, do you see much character development in Around the World in 80 Days, and how does it work?
Yeah, I would say minimal, right? To your point about dialogue being just a tool to push action forward to the next exciting thing. I think the characters in 80 Days don't have time to change. I mean, that being said, there's still an arc, which is a lot more implicit. That if someone goes through all these things, sets out to see the world, and they kind of learn through the experiences that they have implicitly. You learn through the deceptions, you learn through the hardship, you learn actually maybe everything because it's so intense. It all happens at once. You just, I think you don't really see it in the character itself, but you kind of feel it as a reader, because you can kind of project yourself and say, well, if I were in that situation, I'd probably feel that way or that way. I'd be a changed person at the end. But to be fair, the author doesn't spend much time making those points explicit. What was
I mean, and also because special, you are in the adventure with the main characters. So you have to kind of agree with them from the beginning.
Wells
not at all. Most characters are quite two-dimensional. There isn't much like you learn about their motivation down the line, but those motivations didn't change. With A.G. Wells, most of the characters remain reasonably flat. They're not always black and white. They sometimes have concerns and moral failings, but it's reasonably predictable, which is another reason why A.G. Wells is so entertaining and easy to read, and I recommend to everyone to read A.G. Wells stuff because it's absolutely fascinating. The stories are fun. They don't require you to understand some sort of social hierarchy or how things work. They just give you a story, just go and action, right?
Well, absolutely fascinating. I think after The Invisible Man, I read The Island of Dr. Moreau, which is a lot more science fiction, well, equally science fiction, but and again,
equally
sad, a bit grotesque, but just so fascinating though as well, right? Just genuinely, wow, like how did this guy think of all this stuff? And it's so tangible. It has an element of, you kind of feel it, right? As you get immersed, there's some element of tangibility, right? And how he portrays things that are quite abstract, science fiction. You just feel immersed physically in how he tells the stories, which I really enjoyed.
I believe what happened is A.G. Wells was chair-ridden, like he was disabled from what I remember. So he had a lot of time. he just
and therefore maybe the element of the kind of physicality, right? Of the invisibility of moving around, of having these adventures, right? And to a certain point, that's why we read books, is to have this escape, this parallel.
There was no Twitter or Netflix. There were no Twitter or Netflix or entertaining podcasts like ours back then. So all you have to do is write.
Oh, cool. I love this. I feel like I want to read. I want to read these books again. I just couldn't put it down when I started reading again this afternoon. I was like, oh, this is amazing. It's so fun, so funny and exciting. And what else are you gonna do on a holiday, right? On a hot European summer. Cool.
Yeah, well, I'm happy. Just read books.
I'm just gonna jump in the pool. Don't want to brag. Just in a few moments. So if there's anything else you want to share about the book.
So if you don't want to brag, why are you bragging? I don't get it.
Okay, take it back. I'm going to stay here in this hot office and not do anything else but read.
No, jump into a pool. I wouldn't want to hurt your feelings.
But it was good to see you. It was nice to talk about
good thing.
Something cool, something fresh, something timeless. It's good.
Hmm.
Well, guys, see you all next time. I hope you enjoyed our little chat about Jules Verne and Wells, as I was corrected earlier. Go ahead and check
Or
them out.
Orwell, who knows?
Check Orwell as well, because we did speak about it earlier. Never not read
Yeah.
Orwell.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Well, take care. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.